Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Welcome back to the World Economic Federation podcast. My name is Brian Odhiambo, and today I'll be leading the conversation with a very special guest. Is Johnathan Finlay. We're going to hear more about his story and what led up to the World Economic Federation, and he's going to talk to us about why the federation is very important. He is the architect of the federation, which is a groundbreaking initiative that is designed to address critical issues like veterans' benefits, the universal basic income, and equitable access to financial markets. So he's going to talk to us more about that, and we'll get a peek into some of his personal life, and he'll give us more information about that. So thank you so much, Jonathan, for joining us today. And could you kindly introduce yourself and just tell us who Jonathan is in a nutshell?
Hi, my name is Johnathan Finlay. I go by John. I am the architect of the Federation these days, which is a fancy way of saying I design the economics and finance on which the Federation is built as a private equity strategy combined with social media strategy that then leverages the private equity to put it towards green energy infrastructure, which in turn creates a positive loop to repay the debt and reinvest in more green infrastructure, which eventually sells energy, displacing the fossil fuel markets, and then redistributes that revenue from the various oil oligarchs around the world who are currently disrupting our global economy and situation, and returns that value and meeting that green energy need value to the people that actually built everything versus monetary policy being used as a system of control to bring it to a system of more liberation, I guess, is kind of where I'm aiming with the architecture.
Okay, great. So could you kindly give us a brief introduction of why you felt the federation was important, and what are some of the goals that you hope to achieve, and how is the federation significant in addressing, some of these socio-economic issues that we have in America and in the world at large?
I think one of the more important things that the Federation has the potential to do is once you have that positive loop cycle of meeting energy needs, leading to more revenue, which leads to more energy needs, which leads to more revenue. And as that demand is met, it will start to make clear that a lot of the myths about the economic system, which prop up unscrupulous people, they're the best, they're the brightest, they're just so much smarter than all of us. It really comes down to privileged access to credit, where the working class is so far downstream, even the corporations come first. So what this can demonstrate is effectively the working class, they are the labor on which society is built. And the main thing that holds the working class back is their dependency on a privileged few that have access to the credit and the wealth. For example, if I gave you $1 billion, you would be able to invest in a business and make more money, which would beget more money, which would beget more money. Or you could just throw it on Wall Street, retire, and have it all happen anyway with zero input on your part. A lot of the billionaire class today, they don't even pay taxes beyond the low taxes that they do, because what they also have the advantage of is they just take out large loans based off of the valuation in their publicly held portfolios. And they have the ability to use that to get larger and larger of the economy. And they do that by depriving living wages of their workers and various things along those lines. And the entire narrative of our economy is, well, they take all the risk. It's like they risk money, but when they do these ventures and they cut corners, their employees risk lives. That's not the same ballpark. So, where's the risk really coming from? So, I think it's important to be able to eventually fully demonstrate that no, if the working class have access to credit to work untethered from systems of control through a mutually equitable system in the energy industry and the logistics industry, then that can actually readjust the outlying economic system, because there's so much repetition of the statement of, well, you get the best deal you can negotiate. Well, if your kids are going to starve, you're already back on your rear foot. You can't exactly walk away. And the corporation, it doesn't care if your kids starve, so it'll fire you and replace you with someone cheaper first chance it gets. So the most powerful thing that workers have is to either not have to work for employers like that, or to be able to join a union and organize and do various things like that. But unions are dependent on supportive laws, a supportive government that works for the people, that doesn't see them as a workforce to be fed to the corporate world, be it no matter what industry, frankly. So when the voters are seeing nothing as nothing but a workforce that needs to inconvenience the ruling class once every 4 years, of course that system isn't improving for them. But you can get the best, you get the best deal when you can say, you know what, you're a bad employer and I don't need you to feed my family. And that's why I think UBIs are important. That's why basic access to health care is important, because I don't want the system we have of dependency now. But because of the historical injustices of the government regarding the working class, the corporate media system has repeatedly pointed out the betrayals of government against the working class, but the part they leave out is the fact that, well, it was the same corporations that they're being fed to that paid the government to put them in that situation, and try to make it so the checks and balances don't work and all these things don't protect the labor market. Because, well, once the government's not protecting enough, oh, it's all the government's the problem. But it's like, yeah, but once you topple the government, then the same corporations that cause the maladaptive behaviors of government have direct control, and we don't have civil rights, we don't have humanitarian rights, we don't have anything. You don't even have a right to a living wage or a roof over your head or a school for your children that's going to teach them any more than just enough to be useful to go onto the student debt system, which is essentially Wall Street privati- essentially privatizing indentured servitude, which is really gross, because you should be able to, if those loans are so burdensome, you should be able to dispel them through bankruptcy. Because, well, I went in, I was told I was going to get a certain amount of money if I had this degree, and I go out and I'm being offered $12 an hour for my master's degree. but I've got $100,000 student debt. These things don't match. So what is a master's degree worth in that kind of economy? So what was supposed to, that education that was supposed to set that young person free is effectively being used to chain them to their desks. And then they're being told by their parents who are listening to corporate media, well, you just don't want to work. And they're like, no, I need a living wage. Well, why don't you buy a house? Millennials are destroying the housing market. Well, they can't afford houses. It all comes back to the same source. Is what you can't be doing your house payment when you've got a student loan payment of the size that a lot of these kids have. So there is so much propaganda surrounding, well, you deserve only what you can demand. And you can't demand anything from me. In fact, I, as the employer, get to demand a master's degree, and you're going to work for me for $12 an hour without benefits. Well, that just means that they've found someone with a master's degree that's a hard enough position that they actually took that job. So now they're chained to the desk. And that's great for the employers. But it's really bad for democracy, and it's really bad for people in general, American or otherwise. So much of this is simply, we've gone from what used to be kind of various other forms of, of colonialism, where areas of land and the workers upon them were colonialized by the elite. Now they've impersonalized it. They've created this great big banal evil system, which does it for them. So when people look down at those folks, it's like, well, you know, they just don't know any better. They took out loans they shouldn't have. It's like they were literally told, take out this loan. It'll change your life for the better, and people will respect you. And then they find out, no. So when you have entire propaganda echo chamber that everything corporate is better, therefore you should siege the Capitol and do your worst, and then you'll be under corporate rule. That's not improvement on things. And the most important aspect of all of that to me is the separation of state violence and economics. Because right now we have both of these under two incredibly powerful features of society. But they're under the same easily corrupted bureaucrats that we elect in what is generally a managed democracy through the two-party system, at least here in the United States. So when you have everything down to the individual colonization of the individual through the student debt system, and then in the corporate colonization in developing nations, and then the workers in the developing nations are used to undercut the kids that are struggling in the United States with $200,000 in debt. It all comes down to a large-scale colonization effort over the workforce. And I think it's very important that people see it for what it is. And rather than get into some philosophical debate as to whether or not these awful supremacist narratives are justified, because they're not, they never are. Rather than having that debate and listening to people say, oh, you're just woke. It's like, you just go and demonstrate it and don't debate. They say, well, this is my system. You go build your own system. Well, this is the opportunity. So there's just so many things that I want to see the Federation able to accomplish through leveraging the social media site or the social media site's access to private equity that we're building within the company towards green energy, and then just simply saying, all right, we're doing it ourselves because these people are being literally paid not to do it.
Yeah.
And they're dividing families. They're turning parents on kids and grandkids. They're telling their kids that, oh, well, you just aren't, you're lazy. It's the avocado toast. It's like, no, it's a lack of a living wage. Where's all this compassion for your children? Where's this, I had a role in the decisions they made when they were that young? I mean, the whole 18 is suddenly you're adult, but that's the narrative that they use for military recruitment. But it's not just that your brain continues to develop until 25, but you still follow the lead of the adults in your life in that early stage. So when they have the adults in their life saying this is totally normal, this is what you do this, do that, so on and so forth, and you'll have a great life, kids. What do they have to go on that's going to tell them otherwise? Especially when you have an entire corporate media system that says, yeah, that is absolutely right. Sign here, 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 here. Thank you very much. Put it on Wall Street.
Yeah.
How are these kids to know any better? It's normal in every adult signal they're getting.
Yeah.
So yeah. Anyway, sorry. Don't know
Now that
how far field I went there.
Now that was really good. That was really good, and it's touched a lot on some of the other follow-up questions I have, which were, one of the biggest, uh, the factors that are very central to the federation include things like the UBI and equitable access to finance markets, like you have mentioned, and why they're incredibly important and crucial for society's progress. And let me just bring you back. There's something you've mentioned, and I know you've been very critical in the past of the two-party system and its impact, socioeconomic justice. So, how does the federation, propose to navigate and reform these political structures?
Well, the first thing is that there's a lot of discussion these days about double speak and so on and so forth. And perhaps it's just a observation born of my always trying to figure things out as a neurodivergent person. Like, where's this communication breakdown? Because communication is not my strong suit. And it seems more like we're not dealing with an Orwellian situation where we have double speak,
Yeah.
but it seems more like we have triple speak, where one party, let's use the term woke, for example.
Yeah.
First of all, both parties use trickle down or uh, neoliberal economics. So they don't actually disagree on the economics that much. It works generally for Wall Street. So beyond that, when it comes down to the culture wars, is because we have these two very specific parties with very specific messages that are increasingly saying, no, this is the only way you can believe. And if you don't believe this, you're not patriotic enough.
Yeah.
But if you look at how they use language, they use it completely different ways. There's the original meaning of woke, which is an awareness of structural injustice, in my understanding. Then there's the left wing definition of woke. And I don't mean this as in like all left wingers believe this. I'm talking about the Democratic Party left wing. which being neoliberal can't actually address structural problems because neoliberalism is literally the structure of our system and the system is broken. But because they're so bought into neoliberalism specifically, not capitalism, there are many flavors of capitalism. This is neoliberal capitalism. And neoliberal capitalism is still about increasingly being increasingly exploitative of the working class. So they cannot change that.
Okay, so let me bring you back to something you have mentioned about the two-party system, and would really like to know how does the federation propose to navigate and resolve and reform some of these political structures.
I think a significant aspect comes down to communication. So the first project we're doing within the Federation is creating the social media platform. Right now, social media isn't what it started out as. It started as families sharing cat videos, grand pictures, pictures for the grandparents, and various things like that. And it got away from that at one point, and it was interesting during the evolution of social media where it started among the young people, but then the young people started having kids, and the kids were putting pictures of the babies on social media, and that attracted the grandparents, and it brought family together. Even though this kid was in Massachusetts, that kid was in Florida, the grandparents were in California, and various things along those lines. And once those companies, at least for my opinion, went public, they stopped working for their users and started interfering with that communication so they could get as much profit out of it. And then at one point, someone discovered that not only does division lead to less regulation on social media, but it's also really profitable. Then you bring it back to the two-party system where they then learn to use social media to control the various ecosystems. So that was good for the two-party system. So Facebook is doing great. They're making plenty of money from division. The two-party system is doing great because they're less accountable from the people than ever. Because within Orwell, you have double speak, but what we're looking at almost, you might, I guess, I don't know if there's some sort of political science term for it, but triple speak, where you have two media ecosystems, and social media can divide people up that way and try to crowd people this way or crowd people that way, like with the recent research finding that YouTube has a right-wing bias. And that is an incredibly powerful ability to have. But what they're doing is they're sending the older generation who has had all of these promises of neoliberal broken to them. And they're now very jaded and angry, and they've given their parents or their kids this advice that has really snookered them in a lot of levels. And I cannot help but wonder if the media ecosystem is effectively saying, that's okay. You did everything right. You did everything neoliberal asked of you. The first step really is just the social media site, because what we have now is literally a failure to communicate. Because social media used to bring families together. At first, it was just young people, and then those young people got older. They had kids. That led to kid pictures of the kids, and that brought on the grandparents. And now the grandparents were all cooing and everything like that, and things were good. People loved this new social media thing. Oh, look, a cat video. But then once I to me the big transition was when they started going public and they started going, well, your privacy, I took on a lot of risk with my money, so I'm going to just endanger democracy by selling information. Hope you don't mind. Well, what, you want privacy? What, are you entitled? I mean, that was kind of the social media attitude. And the social media companies also found that rage just makes more money because they get the clicks, they get the reactions, they get the anger emojis, and all these various things. So if you wind people up, it's profitable. Push button, get cookie. It's just good business. At the same time, it's not like the social media companies were really being regulated by the political side, where they're saying, look, we serve democracies, we're sworn to uphold and defend the Constitution, and you need to stop winding people up on purpose. I mean, people should disagree, yes, but you shouldn't be literally trying to get people to fight. It's as if you have this puckish little gnome running behind and all the wires going, let me see if I can start a fight here. Only it's all done through code. And that seems like such a, this is unethical, right? But no, I have it's unethical not to make money. And it's like, yeah, but you say you're patriotic. You say you care about human rights. You say you care about these things, but not being unethical is somehow a minus to your shareholders. Oh, okay. And that's perfectly well and good with the political sphere because, well, division is good for them too, because the more people are yelling at each other, the less they're yelling at their leaders. And the most powerful thing about social media is within that ability to feed people this information or that information, not only can they sow division through misinformation and go, oops, did I do that? But then on top of that, they then start having the algorithms sort people into two different groups. Generally, older people get drawn this way, and younger people get that way. Rural people go this way, urban people go this way. And then you give them two different ecosystems that use language completely different. And I'm no poli sci expert. This is more just like my own observation from probably being neurodivergent and just trying to navigate and paying a lot of attention. And when I end up talking to various people, I always have to do a certain amount of neurodivergent code switching. So I pay a lot of attention to how people use language so I'm not misunderstood, because you get used to that after a while. And what it seems like is when you have three different meanings for a single word, could be one of many words that are used in discourse about politics, about economics. Like, for example, capitalism now means neoliberal capitalism. So if I criticize neoliberal capitalism, someone says, you're not a capitalist. I'm like, no, I'm a capitalist. I'm just not a neoliberal capitalist. It's a completely different thing. So let's take the word woke, for example, where you have what I understand the more academic term, which is to be aware of structural injustice. Now, if you go to a Democrat politician, you know, the Democratic voters are not a monolith, just like the Republican voters are not a monolith. But the leadership, they're both a monolith unto themselves, but they're also a monolith together because they're joined at the hip through their adherence to what is neoliberal capitalism. So you take that word woke and bring it over to the Democrats, and it becomes something very superficial, very performative, because they can't actually do anything about the systemic injustice because neoliberalism drives the systemic injustice. They believe in trickle down economics. They believe in massive deregulation. And they believe in all these various things that when corporations become too powerful, they can become a threat to the working class and the democracies that protect them. And that's what we have in the United States today and in many other countries. This isn't a problem unique to us. But once they have that word woke, it becomes something completely different, which isn't about systemic injustice, because again, that's all baked into neoliberalism. It then has to become about performative woke, which is only a culture war issue. It has to be about it's roughly the political equivalent of I have a black friend. Look, it's a woman in office. Don't you like how she looks in those pantsuits or whatever and all these various things? And it's like, well, we need a woman in charge. It's like, yes, but we need someone in charge who's actually compassionate. You can change the label, man, woman, they, them, black, white, any other race, whatever you want. But if the policy is still neoliberal, you're still going to have the same problems. So if you just put all these performative measures forward and say, look how progressive we are, but you're not actually working on the systemic problems that are the problem of the working class, not just this minority or that minority. Because the working class, that's right versus left. And that's where they want that division. So it gets appropriated down to this from feminism, TM, to woke, TM for the Democrats. It's more about the appearance thereof, so people don't look under the hood and go, you know, that looks a lot like trickle down economics and deregulation. Hey, are you Reagan? So then you go to the other side, and they have their own press ecosystem. And woke becomes associated with Nazis and socialism and communists and, you know, other toxic, awful things like blood libel and white genocide and all these horrible conspiracy theories, because you don't want them looking under the hood too. Yeah. In fact, you'll notice that a lot of conspiracy theories, they're really just narratives that explain why the economic system doesn't work the way it says it does. But the problem is that we're not even in a capitalist society. We're in what is closer to a neo-mercantilian. I could be saying that wrong right now. Neo-mercantilian economy, and in which case it makes perfect sense that we're in all this trouble. We're not getting the results of capitalism because we're not doing capitalism. Because the whole point of capitalism is that you're not forcing people to work through threat of violence like communism does. They seize all the assets, and if you don't work, they send in the troops. But in a neo-mercantilian system, if nobody works, well, it's a colonial system anyway, so you send in the troops. Just because you have a government between the rich ruling class in the business community versus the rich ruling class in the business community that happen to be the party leaders, there's functionally not really a difference. So they need all of these conspiracy theories to explain, and who better to blame than these various minorities? So that narrative becomes, well, they just don't want to tell you that the world works in this awful, gross way, because this should be a perfect system if it wasn't for them. And again, they don't look under the hood and say, hey, this is trickle down economics. That's exactly what they. So even there's a more recent. I don't know if it's recent. I'm not that up on right wing stuff. I've heard reference to uniparty as a conspiracy theory, but there is no uniparty. The uniparty is the corporate donors that and the think tanks that all bolster and propagandize neoliberalism.
Yeah.
And neoliberalism governs both of these. So now suddenly, rather than sharing cat videos and baby pictures, parents are spending Christmas and Thanksgiving alone because their kids are just too woke and they're being poisoned with their minds and so on and so forth. That college, so on so college is the reason my kids won't talk to me. And it's like, uh, kids don't talk to their parents when they're not shown compassion. That's what happens. And it's not the university system that didn't show them compassion. It's their friends that are saying, yeah, man, my parents are doing it too. It's not right, but it's a situation. And if you have to, go no contact to protect yourself, to protect your kids. You're a parent now. You do what you have to do. Protect your babies. And that right wing ecosystem, as much as they talk about these family values, they divide families because they say, oh, don't be compassionate. They're just lazy. They don't want to work for it. And when you have these people, meaning woke as in socialism, Nazism, communism, and then woke over here means, preachy and performative, when there's actual systemic injustice, that uniparty conspiracy theory is that neoliberal order, which is broken up across two parties. So by having a social media site that is friendlier for families, that is run by the people for the people, they can start hearing each other again. Because if you look on social media, it's like no one's listening to each other. And we have way bigger problems than arguments about anything. Parents are suffering, kids are suffering. We're looking at considerable risk to the economy, outbreak of multiple wars. We have a climate crisis on our hands. Red states are increasingly getting nailed by these climate events because of hot water in the Atlantic, and we're just not talking to each other. And that performative stuff from the Democrats has cast shadow across all of science. Because, oh, well, if they believe in science, well, they told me neoliberalism would work. Here I am, I've lost my retirement twice in as many decades. What are they going to do? They feel like they were lied to by the Democrats, but the Democrats just appropriated the right-wing party, the party right-wing party platform around the 90s, which is why it's so
Mm.
effective when Trump sits there and says, the Clintons, the Clintons, the Clintons, Pelosi, because they all came out of that neoliberal takeover of the Democratic Party, which is when they functionally, it used to be kind of a balance between the more corporate Democrats and the working class Democrats, and then it finally became just the corporate Democrats. And there became a shift from over here, and everyone who is disenfranchised, which were the rural voters first, that they were the ones left behind first. But it's just like Putin pulling the draft from the more rural communities, so it doesn't actually impact the cities right away, because when the cities get unrest, things get nasty and you lose elections. But if a bunch of rural communities end up impoverished or lose all their sons, well, if a tree falls in the forest, well, they should have updated their economy. Well, they had Wall Street come in and buy up all their assets, shut down Main Street, and when they were done taking whatever was there, they just drive off with a giant hole in the side of the mountain. So,
Yeah.
because of that dynamic, the cities were running a couple decades behind, and everything that the young are complaining about now is what was done by that neoliberal takeover of the Democratic Party, at least in my observation. So you can't really blame parents to a certain degree because of that media ecosystem and the constant fear hits that they're getting from that. And then you have on top of that, they followed all that advice. They followed all of it, and they've lost that retirement. And their kids are struggling based on advice that they gave their kids back in the 90s, back in the aughts, and decade after. And it's really hard as a parent to go, wow, I really messed that up. I'm sorry, kiddos. I will try to do better, because the press is too busy giving corporate America every excuse as to why it's not their fault. So you better blame your kids, because you gave them every opportunity, didn't you? You took our advice, didn't
Yeah.
you? And now they're just ungrateful. They don't want to work. And it's just that same refrain over and over again. And when you have the social media sites compartmentalizing people and dividing families, and then you
Yeah.
have the media system compartmentalizing people and treating them to entirely use the English language differently. Neither of them are necessarily the truth, but they are different. So when the liberal arts trained kid tries to talk to their parents, or the one who believes in neoliberalism talks to their parents, they're not using the same language. When the kid who went to university and learned the more academic terms for all of these things, well, they use that language completely differently. So when they go and talk to their parents, of these three languages, which one do they speak?
Yeah.
And I think that's the most important thing I think we're going to start with doing
Yes.
with, in the Federation project, because, yeah, it's all well and good that we can use the private equity from the social media site's operation to fund greater green projects, ultimately building into green infrastructure and sell that to develop the currency and stuff. That's all well and good. But the first thing we need to do is have a communication system that is trying to allow people to work together better, and who's not trying to divide people for profit,
Yeah.
but bring people and families back together for progress. Look, we might not agree this or that, but we both agree that we care about our kids and this is jobs.
Yeah.
We might not agree about this or that, but you know what? This will help you with your retirement, mom and dad, and you can have everything that was taken away from you by the neoliberal system.
Yeah.
And all have the job too, and the living wage, and we'll both have the health care, and we can build this together as a legacy to our grandchildren. So while these first however long is going to be a lot of work, maybe we can actually leave something behind better than how we got it.
Yeah.
Because our the greatest generation, they did good things in defeating Hitler and stuff like that, but they they didn't fix everything at home well enough that it wasn't quickly rolled back.
Yeah. That's true.
So we 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 need to hopefully in time build that communication infrastructure and use that to help people work together better towards the projects that are political leaders. They're not leaders, they're simply doing what they're told by their lobbyists.
Yeah.
We need actual leaders to say, okay, this is how we should do this. This is how we work together. And unless people are actually able to communicate, we can't even discuss
Yeah.
the best way to do it.
Yeah.
The and the next thing after that is really just recreating that social safety net that's been gutted for privatization and profit. It's
Yeah.
already happened that they're trying to defund the VA so it'll force it into privatization
Yeah.
and various other projects like that, because all this austerity policy, because well, if we spend that, that'll just drive inflation and interest rates and so on and so forth, so we can't work on that. It's like, yeah, that's because there's a revolving door between Wall Street and the Federal Reserve. And if Wall
Yeah.
Street is governed by the self-serving ideology of neoliberalism, that's how the Federal Reserve is operated. So anytime you do something for the people and not the corporation, you can, as long as there are payouts to the corporations, oh yeah, we're cooking with gas. If you start doing roads, schools, education beyond high school and stuff like that, oh, we can't have that health care? Oh, absolutely not. They need to count on their employers for that. Well, great. Now if their kids get sick and they don't have a job, what happens to their kid? Well, that's not their problem. They should work harder. They should work for less. And all these various things. And there's always this narrative handily in place that it's somehow the workers' fault when they have access to all the credit. They have they govern the philosophy of the Federal Reserve, which is encouraged to punish them, making that better future for their children.
Yeah.
So I hope that this system eventually becomes that vehicle for that better future that our politicians are paid to deny them, that our children are due. Because I think the generation that has gone through so much education and struggled through so many economic meltdowns and the global war on terror and various things like that, they should have that opportunity to build that better world for their children.
Yeah.
And their leaders just aren't doing it. So that's what I hope really extends out of everything else, is a system where you separate state violence from the economic system. Because right now, You have the Federal Reserve screwing over the working class, and anytime someone tries to protest, be it violence against the working class in various categories, which are
Yeah.
usually driven by desperation and hunger.
Yeah.
So they start protesting, and you send in the police or the militarized police or just straight up military
Yeah.
because it one feeds corporations because all of a sudden police precincts need an APC. So it's great for Wall Street. So good thing they have a tank to, gas your children. Tanks are good for Wall Street. Education is good for kids. Living wages are good for kids. But of course, they can always have the money for the tank.
Yeah.
And there needs to be a reconciliation with the fact that if you put state violence and the power over the economy in the same basket, someone will come up to a politician and say, I will pay you to rig this system in my favor. And if those plebs get out of hand, we'll just send in the tanks and you can buy the tanks from me. So, what incentive is there to actually work for the people when you can force the people to work for the corporations which pay our leaders? One helps one group, the other helps the other group, and we're only allowed to do one
Yeah.
thing under the Federal Reserve.
Yeah.
So being able to have an economy where people can work together and have access to equitable access to the private equity system for the working class, which is now very protected by the private equity slash hedge fund class. Well, this uses, it's like, imagine, if you will, all the credit that Facebook could access based off of all that money they make with various strategies that led to January 6th and the interference with the 2016 elections and various things like that. Imagine if you could do a social media site without all that, but was still making money in a more just and equitable fashion. And rather than increasing revenue by trading on people's privacy and their family relationships and their ability to see their grandkids, you instead just build green energy and do a revenue split so grandparents can spend more time with their kids so they can have that retirement and various things along those lines. Because I would rather have it go to that the energy revenue go to the working class than a fossil fuel oligarch, which is just going to destroy our environment and, frankly, in my opinion, try to overthrow
Yeah.
democracies. So if democracies are to survive, we need to actually get past this right left tribalism, get out of these ecosystems, and stop reinforcing these narratives that, oh, well, it's the right's fault. If they just vote for our garbage, then all this would, this will, good stuff will happen. And our leader will have the power of state violence, and then we can tell them how the economy works. It's like, have you tried actually being equitable with the working class? Have you tried doing it without state violence? Well, no one would work. They're all too lazy if you give them a UBI. Wow, you sound a bit like a colonial lord. Thanks for that. That was incredibly patronizing. They'll just spend it on drugs and these various narratives that are used to make people comfortable with having their freedoms taken away because, well, at least it's not the government. if it's a human right, no one should take it away. Period. End of
Yeah.
story. I don't care what side of the political aisle you're on. And if the Federation can help people bridge that gap and build a better future, that's exactly what we try to do.
So there are a lot of different organizations that claim to do what the federation is doing. Social media sites like Meta, which is Facebook, Instagram, and Threads. We have Twitter. What separates the federation social media site and the federation as a whole from all these organizations and social media sites that have been under fire, for example, for selling users' data and breaching, privacy? What makes the federation social media platform and the federation alone, in general, different from organizations such as, say, the IMF? Why should an individual put their trust on the federation?
Let's start from the top downward because there's a lot of people that need to have a seat at that table in order to create a
Yeah,
really equitable system. So, at the very top level, social media sites have been used to encroach on people's privacy on behalf of corporations, governments, and various things like that that were have led to quite anti-democratic outcomes.
yeah,
And we are not a social media company. We are more of a logistics company that has a social media component.
yeah,
You see a lot of the disruptions that go on in society because someone owns a certain thing that everyone else demand on, and because they have that exclusive contract or they have this or that the other thing, because they have that de facto monopoly, they can start asking what prices they want, and then they discover, oh, if there's a supply chain disruption, all prices go up and I get a larger cut of everything. And then my costs go up, of course, and then you get this negative feedback loop. And
yeah,
that's because we've we've been taken over by international middlemen where people are being separated from the natural resources of their community on behalf of these international middlemen who have
yeah,
that privileged access to credit.
yeah,
And they spend a lot of money to be unaccountable. And they spend a lot of money
yeah,
to also instill philosophy in the greater society through the corporate media system that all the problems they pay to exist in government are pushed on government, not the source of the actual money. When you're doing to use an analogy, a crime or perhaps literal crime investigation, you follow the money.
yeah,
So let's actually follow that money back to the source, and it leads back to these people that control that bottleneck on energy and various things like that because they say, oh, look, the less there is, the more I can charge. So you have market manipulation happening at every level because the
yeah,
higher prices you can demand, the more you're going to be goosing your books, which in turn gives you more access to that credit through the private equity system,
yeah,
where you go and then get loans from the bank, which has the access to the reserve window and whatnot.
yeah,
And so they're kind of gaming the system to get access to more and more credit. And at the same time, because all of those, everything is going down for the worker and everything is going up for them. So the working class has less access to credit, while the corporations have more access to credit, and that continues that negative cycle of corruption within those governments.
yeah,
So it, that's one aspect, but then there's also the IMF aspect, where much like the student loan system has done on the individual level, the IMF, at least in my view, um, they give loans to corrupt leaders often
Yeah.
who they take a nice tidy cut, and well, because we yeah, clearly if this country was more stable, we could trust that own country's company to exploit the natural resources. But I'm sorry, we've we as a bank have worked with this company before, so everything has to go to them, which it is in effect for them giving their client a
Yeah.
loan, not you alone, the client the loan, which gives them access to more credit too.
Yeah.
So while the loan is on the books of the country, the loan is the profit of the client.
Yeah.
Because the country is being led by someone who's taking such a cut from a corrupt system,
Yeah.
that means those dollars do even less for that country.
Yeah.
And then eventually you get enough social upheaval, that leader goes into exile with their many millions in whatever bank account somewhere,
Yeah.
while the country itself, with all of its natural resources, is left with billions of dollars in debt and still no economy.
Yeah.
And and then at that stage, the IMF, the creditor, gets to say, well, I'm afraid that your loan isn't good, so we need this mine, that mine, or however they want to demand it be settled.
Yeah.
And this just happens over and over again. So it's doing at a international scale what is exactly being done to the American student through the student loan system, where they're like, you need this loan, which is really going to the for-profit school system. You need this loan to make your future thrive. And then that school gets to make the money, and then the employer gets to make the money, and the school and the employer are the clients, the more important clients of the bank,
Yeah.
because the working staff, well, they're the ones who just provide some of the basis off of which the bank does its lending. So of course the banks have more interest in the success of these entities than those entities, because well, we're all varying levels of publicly traded and whatnot, and we generally operate in the same cultural circles and various things like that. And the same thing happens up at that international level. And just like we want to utilize the system to create a better education system that isn't always having their hand out, we
Yeah.
also want to use the system to pay off the student debt. And if you watch the first video that we actually put out, it kind of describes how the dual stage of the energy credit on the Federation books operates a lot like a war bond, which it then uses the green energy to mature that bond, which creates the final energy credit, which is then distributed as part of that UBI system.
Yeah.
The same thing can be done for a country, just at a much larger scale, from that country's own holdings, and that in turn can be used to pay off those IMF loans. So while the IMF gives loans to create a level of dependency so they can leverage the working class of that nation, ultimately turning that government into a occupational force of the working class than a functional functional governance of a healthy society.
Yeah.
That's where you get all these various instabilities that the developing world is dealing with. It's we in the United States are dealing with the consequences of the colonization of our young's bank accounts, and you're dealing with the colonization of your national bank accounts. But the same effective strategies are being done, just at vastly different scales, to the point where they don't show through as, oh, that's the same scam. So what our system is a top to bottom approach of, okay, we all depend on communication logistics. That's a federation priority. We all depend on a healthy uh, educational system. That's a federation priority. The investment in economic development in small towns and developing nations, that should be a priority, which it isn't for Wall Street, because small towns and such, they're just there to be exploited for their natural resources, while cities exist to be exploited for their workers.
Yeah.
I talked about different languages earlier in the interview, and you can see that in the debates about minimum wage
Yeah.
versus what the meatpacking industry is doing to the rancher.
Yeah.
The meatpacking industry is essentially a licensed monopoly through regulation. And it was those regulations were written through regulatory capture to make the working class rancher dependent on the system. So while they're an independent contractor, they may as well be an Uber driver. They're just an Uber driver with cows. So I just got a mental picture of the cow with Uber over its head. But anyway, so when you have these people saying, I can't make a living wage, I have to do the gig economy, I can't make a living wage, the minimum wage is too low, and this guy says the meat packing plant is squeezing me out. It's the identical capture, but one is capturing the land and rural economy, the other one is capturing the housing market and various things like that to keep and the student loan system to keep those people dependent on paying rent, not home ownership, to keep that rancher dependent on that meat packing plant, not independence, which is one of the reasons why, like, for example, the Federation, in my view, since meat packing it's a health and safety concern. Absolutely. I'm not against regulation in that regard, but that regulation should not be a reason for Wall Street to get to destroy small businesses and communities through the meatpacking system.
Yeah.
So, in my view, the Federation should be handling things like that because we can do it and distribute that cost over the system itself on a global scale where you really get good economies of scale.
Yeah.
And pass those savings on to the rancher so the people in the urban areas get more affordable food and the rancher gets to have a thriving business again because there's not that Wall Street middleman saying, yeah, well, I wrote these regulations through my lobbyist, so it's really blame the government on this. But anyway, so you're going to pay me whatever I ask because what are you going to do? Pay for the expensive gas to drive your stuff 500 miles that way, and they're just going to screw you too? They don't have an alternative.
Yeah.
So that is why the Federation is logistics funded and expanded by green energy. We're not really a social media company. Communication is just an aspect of being a logistical hub. Yeah. So while a social media company has to trade on your privacy, has to do all these things to make money and drive value to the shareholders.
Yeah.
The Federation is saying, no, the social media is just part of our communications infrastructure, which drives all of the logistics. And you start having that integration then governed through the democratic processes that will be built into the social media site, which gives people a day-to-day voice over the
Yeah.
administration of the Federation to guide their leaders as the lobbyists do today. Because while it used to be a case where you could go into a room and you needed to wait in line and so on and so forth, because large scale communication did not yet exist on the level of social media. Now social media can do it. It's just being used as a system of control versus a system of communication. And again, liberation. So this
Yeah.
is an opportunity for governments to allow their people to not have to give up their privacy, so that lack of privacy can be weaponized into the manipulation of the democratic process, of attacks on capitals and various things like that, where the desperate the desperation of the people is weaponized through the propaganda systems in social media, so they're turned against what little democracy they are even allowed. Because once those relatively at this point admittedly managed democracies are overthrown, then the democratic experiment is overthrown for at least a generation.
Yeah.
And it's overthrown when we're in a generation that really needs to do something about poverty, about pandemics, about taking the profit incentive out of vaccines so they can be trusted
Yeah.
to not give money to politicians that spread vaccine hesitancy. Because, well, if vaccine hesitancy exists, you make more money, because you then have something go from a pandemic to an endemic. And that's
Yeah.
just more money. If everybody got a shot, it gets handled, we wash our hands of it, and everything goes on. But if we need those boosters over and over again, it doesn't matter if a bunch of people start getting brain bleeds in 20 years because they got COVID so many times, because it's all going to fall on that medical system that completely doesn't exist. So people go bankrupt for it, or just, die because they're takers, as people with disabilities were labeled during COVID.
Yeah.
You need to build trust of those institutions in which we trust our freedom and our health and our family's welfare. And the entire system is paid to violate that trust. So we're a logistics organization that's sitting there saying, no, we want to work for the people, by the people, just like you democracies do. Which means that, unlike corporations that try to weaken democracies, weaken regulations, so they can cut corners to increase their line goes up for short-term profits on Wall Street, we're saying, no, let's do this right. Let's make sure our workers are safe, our communities are safe. They're not having toxic chemicals dumped from trains because we want to cut corners and increase load sizes and minimize our overhead of employees and various things like that. We should we should not bear the externalities of their logistic shortcuts, I
Yeah.
guess, is the short version of that. So why should governments have to put up with corporations that are hostile to their people and hostile to the democratic process? Governments should be able to work with the financial system that says, hey, we're all in this together. We've got a climate crisis. Let we won't be able to get to everybody right away. We're a startup that, that was built on private income, private equity, and then it's just being put into a democratically managed trust to handle all that stuff. But
Yeah.
at least when we're working on it, if not everyone is seen to, we need to just keep building
Yeah.
until everybody has their seat at the table. Whereas the current economic system says, well, these guys are the best of us because they have privileged access to credit, because of course they're our best and brightest, which is being turned into a clown
Yeah.
show of demonstrating the opposite as we look at our billionaire class today.
Yeah.
So we can have the system that is saying, no, this system has that privileged access that was built off the equity of a social media site and then expanded into the energy industry.
Yeah.
And at every step of the way, the people were represented because we are ranked choice voting, day-to-day feedback from the community, localized, nationalized, and internationalized, utilizing social media communication frameworks. So not everything is happening through backroom deals. Because unless the
Yeah.
system is transparent, it can't be equitable. And when things aren't equitable, that's when those systems have the incentive to invade people's privacy, to
Yeah.
disrupt our ability to respond to that inequity. And then once they've disrupted that enough, things break out into violence and they say, look at what you're making me do, you uncivilized people. You made me roll out the tanks again to preserve this democracy.
Yeah.
I think governments should like the idea of being able to serve those people without getting into debt, being able to build that infrastructure without going into debt, have those schools, again, without going into debt. And we keep on building until everyone is seen to.
Yeah.
And if they do have a problem with our transparency, if they do have a problem with our mission to serve those people, I think that just says more about the system they're protecting and the
Yeah.
values it holds than, you know, anything that we could ever describe.
Yeah.
Because what they usually, the establishment usually does is deny people their place at the table, and then when they finally get fed up, they attack the Capitol, and then they use that as an excuse to crack down.
Yeah.
If this sounds familiar, based on recent events, not just in the United States, it should.
Yes.
So I, 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 I think it's very telling that, you know, the governments, once they hear more and more about this platform, they're going to be forced to choose what is it going to show if I am deciding to go into debt to IMF so I can give myself millions of dollars and then leave the country in billions of dollars in debt with a bunch of desperate people,
Yeah.
when I had this option that didn't require that, that put everything into trusts
Yeah.
and is helping protect the privacy of the people through a transparent system so they can have privacy. Because
Yeah.
one system or the other, the individuals, the citizens can have privacy, or the system itself can have privacy. But you can't have both.
Yeah.
And people deserve privacy. It's the system that needs to be transparent, in my view. And if governments are against that transparency, if they're against our peaceful methodology to disrupt the um, fossil fuel stranglehold on the energy industry,
Yeah.
that says more about that protectionist government than it says anything about us. Because we need to stop chaining ourselves to tractors and gluing ourselves to countertops and absurd things like that that only
Yeah.
make days harder for the working class. What, you don't think they're not struggling too? You if 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 we were focused more on that general acknowledgement of systemic injustice and inequity,
Yeah.
you wouldn't be in the way of a working class person just trying to get to the job. Yes, we know it's bad, but get out of the way. People are struggling.
Yeah.
And if you look at the system that's in place right now, it has all the hallmarks of a managed democracy. So it's not like raising the awareness of the climate problem is really
Yeah.
going to do any good. So you have one group that's just decided to go into full-on denial mode, and another group who's saying, "I've got to do something," but they're so desperate to get something done, they're making it harder on the fellow working class, which again increases that divide. I
Yeah.
want to just say, look, you don't believe in man-made climate change, fine. Do you believe in jobs? Do you believe that a rancher should get a fair shake from the state sanctioned monopoly created by regulation?
Yeah.
Do you think he should get to that farmer should get to keep their farm and not lose everything to a large chain or distributor or whoever they have to do business with that holds a logistical point of privilege and privileged access to credit, as big agriculture does?
Yeah.
Because when the rural community looks at the Democratic Party, they see a party that promised to do something under the Clintons, and it just turned into trickle down economic. Well, it always was. It just was double speak neoliberal economics, which is basically trickle down. So they got stabbed in the back again. So then, you know, you had W, things didn't grow great there. But
Yeah.
then this Obama came and it was hope and change and so on and so forth. And that was right after the 2008 crisis. And everyone's like, oh, God, can there please be some accountability? And nope. And that is, I mean, everyone's talked about the mystery of the how could they go from Obama to a Trump voter? It's like, could it have anything to do with 2008 and the complete lack of accountability, where the Democrats finally fully waived surrender to the Wall Street lobby? I mean, maybe that could be it. Because while Trump's policies are horrifying and toxic and anti democratic and will only hurt the people he says it'll help. I mean, when he says, if they can do it to me, they can do it to anybody, he's not talking to the working class. The working class get accountability all the time. The January Sixers are learning that. But how many prosecutions of the financiers of January 6th, the organizers of January 6th, have gone to prison? I can't think of one. How much banking, if you look at 9/11, how much banking changes happened? How many warrants went out for the financiers of that whole thing? We had an attack on our government, and none of that has happened. So there's this disgusting divide between our democratic principles and the actions of our leaders, because they don't want to set the established, they don't want to set the precedent of accountability for the establishment. And that is what Trump is really warning about. It's not a plea to the struggling, it's a plea to the billionaire class who's, and he's saying they can come for you next if we start having accountability for someone like me. I'm the president, former president of the United States. Who are you? And that is the most terrifying thing in the system. And that's why I believe that so much of this DOJ process has been soft pedaled and everything took so long, because if Trump had just gone into retirement and given the documents back, I firmly believe we would never have even heard about it, and nothing would have gone anywhere, and there probably wouldn't have been much on the prosecution front. But the issue was forced because he didn't go paint or whatever. So there is so much that the right-wing working class has seen come out of the young people. They see the hope, the change, and the propaganda that the Clintons were spewing in the 90s, and young people don't remember that. And the same messaging that is rejected by the Obama-Clinton vote or Obama-Trump voters today is the same messaging effectively that the Clintons kind of used when they appropriated the center-right column. It was essentially, again, in my view, a Dixiecrat takeover of the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
So at least Trump, all of that awful and all of that toxicity in their mind punishes those Democrats, because they know they're not getting anything else out of those people. So they could at least, make them suffer too. And the kids are sitting there going, but they want to do these things and so on and so forth. And the older generation is like, they don't mean it. I've been hearing that all my life. Again, talking two different languages, two media ecosystems. Those who have given up hope, and those and have gone cynical and nihilistic, and those who haven't seen the degree of disconnect between what the neoliberal order says and what the neoliberal order does. And I think that's one of the reasons why, if you go up to someone who's not a propagandist on the right wing, they can't tell you what woke is, but they know it when they see it. And what I think a lot of them are actually seeing when they're actually seeing it versus when they're just projecting it on someone they don't like, is it's the performative aspect. Yeah, I heard them say that. They don't mean it. Yeah, I heard that they said this stuff in the 80s. They said this stuff in the 90s. I gave up. I'm an Obama-Trump voter. Obama said hope and change. He didn't prosecute a single executive after 2008. Hope and Change decided to take this rotation off. And then people thought, wow, well, once he's in his second term, he's really going to change things. Obama will be unleashed from neoliberalism. And what do we get from 4 more years? We got 4 more years of neoliberalism.
Yeah.
Trump is a monster. But Trump getting elected is a primal scream of a generation that has been repeatedly betrayed by both parties, and at least Trump has squeezed out the performative people in the W administration and so on and so forth, leaving only the worst of the W administration. Like the old Herbert W administration was kind of the old Herbert Walker crowd with a bunch of legitimizing the neo-conservative movement.
Yeah.
On the other side, the facts don't matter, people.
Yeah.
And that was cemented when McCain had Palin as his running mate. Is that really legitimized things? If you want to see people go absolutely berserk, see what happens if AOC ever becomes a running mate.
Yeah.
The oil lobby would go nuts. All these various industries would go nuts, because at that point, it would be legitimizing the left wing of the Democratic Party. Just like McCain legitimized the far right wing of the Republican Party. And again, it was a relatively performative, well, I'm running against Obama, so we're going to have the first female vice president. Who are we going to get? Ooh, let's get someone who's incredibly populist. How about that lady up in Alaska? So that whole thing where the promises of the more establishment Republicans never came to pass, but then hope and change comes, so they go over to Obama, and then hope and change fizzles in the second term too, and then the primal scream happens, and everyone was sitting there going, Hillary, she's stable. It'll be like another Obama term, like another Clinton term. It'll be the good old days over again. And it's like, you mean when my community got gutted and bought up by hedge funds? You mean that one?
Mm.
That wasn't so great. I didn't like that.
Yeah.
But then there's this guy who that man must struggle just to tell a truth. But the truth, in order to have an effective lie, it seems like you need to have that kernel of truth. And the kernel of truth is the anger and the betrayal that his voters feel when they're hitting the twilight of their lives. Their kids are suffering. They did everything they were told. They gave all the right advice to their kids, and their kids are sitting there saying, now I've just got student debt. Now I can't get a living wage, and I still have to pay student debt. I'm going to have to live into your basement. They're like, someone's not buying my house, and so on and so forth, and all these things. Are they going to blame themselves when they were doing everything they were told? No, absolutely not. But then they have that propaganda seeing them every day on, Fox News and the various other right-wing outlets saying, blame your ungrateful kids. The system should work perfectly. We promise you. And because they don't want to say they gave bad advice to their kids because they were honestly misled about how the economy works, because it's mercantilian, not capitalism, they go, okay, because how must it feel to have guided your children through such huge and important decisions, and all they've done is line up their kids to be exploited by Wall Street and not even to be able to buy a house and not even be able to afford grandkids?
Yeah.
How would that feel if you were in that stage of your life and you've lost your retirement and your kids can barely make ends meet? What are you going to do?
Yeah.
you see that Fox News every day, but you only see your kid once a week, and then you start going off on them about how lazy and entitled they are because you heard on Fox News, and then that makes the kid draw away from their parent who isn't even looking at their lived experience, that their information has, the world has changed, and yet somehow
Yeah.
the kids are responsible for that when they have the least power in society.
Yeah.
It's easier to blame the kids because otherwise the parents have to realize I helped them make those decisions. And I did it based off of the news
Yeah.
and the media and the literature and this entire ecosystem that says this is the only way that your kids are going to have worth in the future economy, which is globalized and hyper competitive. Well, we should just shut down the borders then. Where do these things come from?
Mm.
Those
Mm.
horrible people, they just came out of all this stuff. It's the same thing with racism, where an upper class person can say something that is absolutely disgusting about the lower class. And they say, well, I'd say that about anyone in the lower class because, they're not the best and brightest. So they have a certain degree of
Yeah.
cover. So when they say they just brought it on themselves, they're not racist because they're saying it from the top of society and everyone's below them. But when someone who's in the working
Yeah.
class, lower levels of society, they say it about the people below them. And as you get lower in society, you get more ethnically diverse. So those people are inherently minorities. So if you're already so close to the bottom of society and you're afraid of falling down, and you look at the person who's going to be, your employer says, is just going to take your job, he'll do it for less.
Yeah.
You're dividing that workforce, and they say something they see as classist in their head. And I can't help it that class seems to have these demographics. Why can't I
Yeah.
say classist shit like the rich guy does? No one calls the,
Yeah.
liberal elite from the coast that he can't say awful things about the working class and how entitled they are to have the audacity to expect health care and a living wage. But if you say that in a
Mm.
different context, it takes on a racial context. So they're sitting there
Yeah.
going, well, fine, if I'm a racist for saying these things, I'll just be racist. It's that, well, if no one's going to listen
Mm.
to me, fine. Because then at that point,
Yeah.
those parents get separated from their children and they get fed into that social media ecosystem that then does increasingly make it overtly racist. And by
Yeah.
that point, the parent is so far gone from their kid's life because they've disowned them because they're trans or they're dating the wrong ethnicity and various things like that. These people are so isolated, and that's where you get the cult like qualities that you find in the MAGA movement.
Yeah.
And the problem is that the Democratic Party cannot call the system on all of these lies because they are now the conservative party that defends those lies.
Yeah.
And the right wing party just has to say, look, they're all lies, but I'll tell you the truth. But it's just further right, nastier lies. So if you're given the
Yeah.
choice between two sets of lies, and it's the Democratic Party that actively betrayed you with their, you know, higher principles and greater equality promised when they're still told by their employees, I'll just replace you and send your job overseas. And now
Yeah.
kids can't talk to their parents can't talk to their kids, and everyone's miserable. And Facebook just is there to feed them. Twitter is just there to feed them. And all these social media sites are just there to feed them. And I bet those grandparents would probably rather have, or most of them would probably rather have a relationship with their grandkids and a reconciliation,
Yeah.
because part of their desperation is they don't have much time left. They are lonely.
Yeah.
And all they have, because their kids are so busy and they're so angry, all they have to keep them company is that rage machine in front of them. And I feel sorry
Yeah.
for them because, when they were younger, they were in my position. They imagine themselves raising their kids to go off and be doctors and lawyers because they went to university. And we don't have, and because the classist system of our economy marginalized the trade so much, you can't even use a student loan to go to trade school. How's that? And our
Yeah.
system sitting there going, why don't we have more plumbers? Why don't we have more electricians? Well, I can't imagine why. Because you support the saturation of a very narrow skill set. You stop teaching all the various classes that neurodivergent or are more typically neurodivergent trades, like being the mechanic, being the we it we're very good at focusing on our unique skill that that anyone, at least in my view, who has a talent for a certain thing is by definition neurodivergent, because otherwise their talent wouldn't be abnormal. It's just something we all do. No one says, "Look what a good normal casual walker that guy is." No, most of us walk.
Yeah.
But when you have that mechanic who can make that vehicle perform outside its specs but do less damage, or even no damage through good re-engineering. Not a mechanic, never got to learn that, sadly. I just got to run with diesels mostly.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
the they had a way to be exposed to that in school, and these various other trades in school. There is no shop class. Someone like me would have done great in shop class, and I wish I'd been able to
Yeah.
have one. But school was the way the schools are set up is, if you don't do STEM in the most traditional way possible, we got nothing for you. You're going to graduate late. You're going to be sent to a different school, and various other things like that. Where, well, you're just lucky you have this at all, is how they're treated.
Yeah.
When we used to be able to go to the same school, some kids were better at the math class, some kids were better at this class or that class, and other kids were better at the shop classes. They'd all go their different ways, and they'd all be able to raise their families equitably, safely. But there hit this really elitist point where everyone had to have this degree. No one could be the mechanic because they're just the mechanic, you know. They're in the trades. There's this very dismissive point, to the point you can't even get that student loan. Of course, we have this problem because the system was created by the legislation that created that student loan system. On top of that, the more those people are dependent on those various specialists, the more dependent they are on basically the disposable economy, which just increases the churn of our waste. And that's good capitalism, but waste is a big problem in our society. And we're just sending it to landfills because it's cheaper and we got to make new things. It's not about repair, it's about making it so your car will last less time, because we got to keep those jobs. You have planned obsolescence through the entire economy now. Our clothing, through all the economy. You go through your grandfather's closet, he has shirts he's had since the 60s or 70s, and they're still around, and you remember him wearing it all the time. You just don't find that off the shelf anymore. You got to pay extra because it's all based on consumption, not capitalism. And that consumption is what drives that dependency. And that dependency is on a system that seeks to colonize the working class.
In the second part, we'll talk more about what we had started talking about because I know there's still more you'd like to cover. Yes, and some other topics because we still have other questions prepared. But yeah, we'd like to separate it into two parts just so it doesn't go for too long because this one is already 2 hours and like 10 minutes, I think. Probably more.
Yes, because
Yeah.
I talk too much.
No, it's good. It's good content. It's good content. It's good content. But this has definitely been very insightful, and it's great for people to see just what the federation is aims to do, and this has really been impactful. And we hope that everybody who listens to this, everybody who watches this, gets impacted and gets to see like why the federation is so important. And in our next part, we're definitely going to dive more into some of the milestones we hope to achieve in the near future, the gig economy, like you had talked about, and what the platform aims in driving that. And also, we're going to talk about some of the veterans' benefits. Being a military man yourself, I know we've touched a lot about the VA. We'd like to talk more about how the Federation plans to implement all those. And yeah, but this has been definitely very insightful, and we really look forward to the part two. And we know we have even more content to touch on. Yeah.
So, anyway, I'll talk to you later.
Okay. Thank you so much for your time.
No problem. Bye.
Okay. Bye. So thank you so much everybody for tuning in today. We have had an amazing guest today, the architect of the World Economic Federation, and you have seen just how impactful and how passionate he is. And we are definitely on board to see all the amazing things we can achieve as as the World Economic Federation. And if you've been touched by what you've heard today, head on over to our website, the World Economic Federation, at www.worldeconomicfederation.com to start enjoying the benefits of the federation. So don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and share to everybody. So thank you so much for joining. Looking forward to seeing you in the next episode. Thank you.